We're talking today with Dr. Gordon Balyeat of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Dr. Balyeat, can you start by telling us a little bit about your own background? For instance, where were you born and when?
Well, I was born in Woodland, Michigan, and kind of an interesting circumstance, I feel. I call it the most wanted of babies. My father was quite new in Sparta as the superintendent of the schools in 1909, and he continued to teach there for 34 years. But the climbing of Sparta Hill caused a miscarriage of my mother. And she went to her family doctor there, and he said that she couldn't have babies. But she thought she would get another opinion. And she went down to her mother's, my grandmother, in Woodland, Michigan, and she had the family doctor there who was Dr. McIntyre. He said you can have a dozen. So that's how I happened to be born. And I feel very fortunate then, as most wanted, because all the people in the small village of Sparta were joyous over this circumstance. So I was then...
So you were born in 1911 then?
1911.
Okay. Now, did you grow up in that area?
And I spent my youth there in Sparta then, and was interested in the athletics and hunting and fishing with my father, and got into scouting, became an Eagle Scout, and recently was honored at an annual jamboree here with the Eagle Scouts. I'm honored because I'm the oldest living Eagle Scout of the area. So I'm quite proud of that.
Okay.
I had experience at Manitoulin, and I played the bugle, and people who were camped at Camp Manitoulin, the YMCA camp, they remember me because I got them up in the morning or put them to bed at night with that bugle call.
Yeah. And that camp.
I won a silver cup for being the best all-around camper.
All right. And it's a camp that's still up and running too. Now, when did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1928, and I'd played football, basketball, and track, field hockey, and tennis, and had quite an active life.
And then where did you go to college?
I entered Kalamazoo College, and my high school principal came along visiting my father, and he said, Gordon belongs at the university. In those days, it was easy to change, and they called and canceled the room arrangements and entered the University of Michigan as a pre-medical student.
Now, what was it like being a college student at that time?
Well, college was a lot of fun, and we had a song that said, we're not here for knowledge, we came to college to have fun. Yeah. And in reading my diaries, it was 1930 when I was a third year. I was having a lot of fun. We had a ban against being caught in an automobile. And it was prohibition. And it was a part of the Depression. So we had fun without a lot of the things that make fun these days.
Well, in that era of prohibition, I mean, were there people who managed to bring alcohol onto campus or
We
that
had
kind of thing?
lots of blind pigs And my first experience in a blind pig was about 1930. And yes, we had a man by the name of Art Hurst who came from Detroit or Hamtramck or somewhere with a suitcase and would come in the fraternities and open it up on the floor and sell.
Now, can you explain what a blind pig is for people who don't know that term?
A blind pig was a house somewhere that where they served drinks, and you had to have a card to show because they were illegal and they were secretive, but there were a lot of them.
Okay. Now, did either the university or the local police make much of an effort to control this kind of thing, or did they not work?
Well, they did, sure, yes. They were fairly strict about these rules, and and my fraternity got into trouble, was raided, and found liquor there. And so we had to move out of our SAE house, which is a very prominent fraternity. There were 5 prominent fraternities raided, and that was 1931.
Okay. Now, aside from having to shut down the fraternity house, were there any other consequences to being caught with alcohol in the house?
No, there was nothing personal about it.
Okay. Then, let's see. Did you,
Well,
what?
in 1931, then that was my 28. The spring of 1931, the depression was so bad that my father said that when I wanted to go to college, he said, "I'll send you, but not to become a school teacher." And but in 1931, the depression was so bad that I took some courses and would qualify for a teaching certificate, like my dad had, and I was tempted because things were getting pretty rough.
Well, why would being a teacher be a better choice than becoming a doctor at that point?
Well, my dad was, I don't know. I guess he wasn't fully happy with his work.
Well, of course, being a teacher didn't necessarily pay all that well.
Well, no, that was another thing. His salary was never over $125 a month.
And he was an administrator too, wasn't he?
Yes,
wasn't.
he was superintendent of the school.
Yeah, and so if he's only doing that well, then an ordinary teacher probably doesn't make a lot of money.
We had the same thing at the university. We had our training, and then if we wanted to choose a specialty, we stayed on. But in 31, they had what they call advanced, so you can get in 3 years if you're in the top of your class.
Right.
And so I made that. And fortunately, then that diverted me from having to become a teacher. And so I was very lucky there.
Okay. Now, what did a medical school curriculum consist of at that point? I mean, what kind of courses were you taking when you got in there? And
Well, we started out with a lot of anatomy, gross anatomy, where you do dissections and have a cadaver and two students under instructors and professors that learn the bones, muscle, ligaments, pretty detailed anatomy. You learn very little pathology, but you learn anatomy. And then you have physiology, so you learn what the different organs do. And you have microscopic tissue histology, it's called, and then pathologic histology, and those are the fundamentals of medicine. And then your clinical years, the University of Michigan was one of the world's first and only university hospitals where the student lives in the hospital with the faculty.
Mm-hmm.
And the faculty members have gone from an instructor to assistant professor to an associate professor
Mm-hmm.
to a full professor. The full professor had a top salary of about $4,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
He was supposed to be full-time and not have a private practice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the top professors all had private practices. But the younger men, they didn't, they couldn't raise a family very well
Mm-hmm.
on that amount. And Ann Arbor was quite an expensive place to live, so. But with my $125 a month that I got as an instructor,
Mm-hmm.
and learning more and more by being with, you know, the professors and living with them.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great experience.
Okay. Now, at what point did you get your medical degree? What year was that?
That was 1935. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then once you got that degree, did you simply stay on at Michigan, or
I
did you?
stayed on. I applied for an internship
Mm-hmm.
at Peterbilt Hospital. That was the Harvard hospital
Mm-hmm.
for training. And the New York hospital in New York City, which was the Cornell
Mm-hmm.
University. And I applied at Michigan, my own, and got Michigan.
Okay. And then you chose to stay in Michigan, or did you go somewhere else?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what specialization were you going into at that point, or were you just still
Well,
general?
at that point I was, we were all, as an intern, in those days we had what was called a rotating internship.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have an idea that you'd like a little more of one than the other. There are two choices, medicine or surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was interested in medicine. It required a little more knowledge, and,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a very high grade in anatomy, which I could have been a surgeon, all
Mm-hmm.
right. And I learned enough tying knots as a Boy Scout to
Yep.
know that, and but I preferred, I was interested in diagnostic and the challenge of diagnostic work.
Mm-hmm.
We call them internists.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where did you think you were going to go at that point? What kind of career were you planning to go into private practice?
I
Or?
didn't have anything, a place in mind, but when I got late in my fourth year after graduation,
Mm-hmm.
some were going out to cities. There were only 12 of us
Mm-hmm.
who graduated, and we had a residency and learned more about tuberculosis, diabetes, hypertension, heart attacks, and kidney failure and liver troubles. All those things are part of a diagnostician's
Mm-hmm.
realm. And of course, in those days, we didn't have too much more than basic genetics, and we didn't know about genes very
Mm-hmm.
much. And all those kind of exploded later on.
Now, were there innovations or new things that were coming in that period when you were training, whether it's new drugs or treatments or understanding of particular conditions?
Well, there weren't too many. No, I read a review in the Journal of the American Medical Association of the book that was written by Sir William Osler,
Mm-hmm.
and the man that reviewed it was kind of leisurely reading it. When he got through, he said there wasn't a single disease that they could do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
And that was true. They didn't have a cure for very, very many of these things. And some of them we still don't have a cure for, but we control a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
when at that time insulin had come out, which
Mhm.
was prevented death, premature.
And then where were we in terms of the development of antibiotics? And were those starting to come in then, or?
The first antibiotic was called Pronicil. It was a sulfa drug. It came out in I think around 1935.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Okay.
It was. I learned more about it in my third year of postgraduate.
Okay. Now, so basically, the way it works is we're in essentially like an undergraduate for 3 years, and medical school for 3, and then residency
medical school 4.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then, um,
4 years of postgraduate.
okay. And once you complete that, at this point, were you married yet, or were you still single,
No,
or?
I was pretty rare to be married
Mm-hmm.
since we didn't have money.
You didn't have money, and you were living in the hospital. Okay. What did you do for recreation at that point in time? I mean, when you weren't working, what else was there to do?
Well, we had a lot of parties. We partied quite a bit.
Mhm. Now,
The fraternities and the sororities all held parties. We had class parties too.
Mhm.
And I can't remember it cost anything to have a date and go to the men's union or the women's league
mm-hmm.
to dances. But there was a public dance hall there. It was 25 cents
Mm-hmm.
where you went alone, maybe picked up your date.
Mm-hmm.
They had them here in Grand Rapids too when I came here.
Okay. Now, at what point did you move out to Grand Rapids?
Well, I came here in 1939
Mm-hmm.
after my completion of all I could get.
Right.
And I could have stayed there as an instructor.
Mhm.
I was 2 years. I had the faculty status of an instructor. And I could have stayed there.
So why did you decide to come out here then?
Well, I wanted to go in private practice. I could have gone to Mayo Clinic, but it had been the same thing there it was at Michigan. So I really wanted to go in practice. So the professor got me a position. As I said, I could have gone to Mayo Clinic,
Mhm.
but he got me a position at the clinic in Seattle, and I kind of wanted to go. I thought that'd be a great place to be, and so I was going there, and I resigned from the university. And during the vacation, I took what we call a locum tenens, where you go in and take over some doctor's office. I had a good friend in Mason, so I went and took his practice. He'd been in practice without specializing.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little of everything, but I served, and of course the nurses did most of the work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned quite a bit and delivered a couple babies, and I had a wonderful experience in my junior year of medical school that I could talk about, where we had a vacation through the summer months, and I looked on the board to see what there might be in the way of something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there were these locum tenens where doctors would need someone for a while. But there was one there that there were 3 options that I looked at on the bulletin board. One was from Kayan Shek and go to China and serve in his army for the summer.
Okay.
There was another one to go to the Massachusetts mental hospital, a huge psychiatric hospital, and spend the summer there. And the third was to go to New York City and go to the city hospitals for service there.
Mm-hmm.
I did the latter. I went to New York City, and that consisted of 6 weeks riding an ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a driver from the Lower East Side, and he drove the ambulance. He never knew every alley and every street and everything. And we covered, it was the second largest service in the city.
Mm-hmm.
So we take our patients to Bellevue a lot, and then take a trip somewhere.
So you must have encountered a pretty diverse bunch of people doing that.
Well, I was at Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx, which later became the, what's the name? I've forgotten the name of the school. Anyway, it became a medical school later on, but it was an interesting place socially. It had all black nurses.
Mm-hmm.
It was the only black nurses school in the country.
Mm-hmm.
The patients were all Spanish American. And,
Probably largely Puerto Rican from there, then.
and the, there's something else that was distinctive about it anyway. It was quite a busy place and a busy experience.
And how well did you hold up under all that?
Well, I held up pretty good. I did pick up a woman who was in late or early labor,
Mm-hmm.
and she wanted to deliver on the ambulance. Well, I hadn't had my course in anatomy,
Mm-hmm.
so I tried to hold back the baby, and I couldn't hold back. It delivered on the stretcher in the ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
We went over the cobblestone on First Avenue in New York City, and so it delivered in spite of me. A memorable experience.
Certainly
I
sounds
hung
like it.
on to the back door of the ambulance, and I got out to keep from fainting.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I had kind of an interesting experience. I was going out the ambulance yard to go to the movie, and the ambulance driver was going on a call. He asked me if he'd take me anywhere, and I said, yes, I'm going to Lowe's Theater. So he took me up to Lowe's Theater. The crowds were just coming out. Of course, they all gathered around the ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
And I opened up the back door and got out, and they divided and let me in to go to the movie.
Okay, let's get the story back there to the point where you finish up residency, and you were talking about where you were going to go at that point and how you wound up being in Grand Rapids. Now, you said you'd accepted a position in Seattle.
A friend of mine at this Virginia Mason Clinic, it's comparable to, but the location is what attracted me. I thought that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend that was there already, and he called me and he said, Gordon, it'd be a mistake for you to start your professional career here.
Mm-hmm.
They are in some kind of trouble with the County Medical Society, and without it, I was stranded.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend who was quite a successful New York Life insurance salesman, and he said, "Why don't you just practice here?"
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I'd try it. So I got the last available space in the Medical Arts Building, which was one of the prominent medical buildings with 82 doctors in there.
Mm-hmm.
And took about 6 weeks to fill in the space and build it. And I got professional management out of Owl Creek. So I was the first doctor here to have professional management.
Mm-hmm.
And they directed a lot of what to do. And built this nice space, and right away I had patients. I met on the elevator with electrocardiogram or examination, BMR machine, and started a good practice.
Okay.
I didn't have to go with a group or someone else. Most people,
But you were going into a place where it was set up for people to come in and
yeah,
find doctors and so forth. Okay. Now, what year was that you started that? Was that 39, you said?
1939.
Okay.
In
Now,
September.
all right. Now, September 39 is, of course, when things are starting to get pretty interesting over in Europe. And over about the next 2 years between then and Pearl Harbor,
Oh, yes.
you have the Europeans at war, but the Americans are out of it. Were you paying much attention to what was going on in the world, or were you mostly just
Well,
focusing
not
on
too much, but
your
we
career?
had people who came to the University Hospital
Mm-hmm.
who were coming out of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was Carl List, and he was someone I got acquainted with, and living, as we did there in the hospital. And he and his wife, they liked the outdoors. And I was up here in practice.
Mm-hmm.
I met him and his wife over on the beach at Holland or Grand Haven or somewhere. And he wanted to know about Grand Rapids. I said, a great place. Well, the reason I knew that it was a great place. I had a friend who was a little older than I was. He was highly honored as one of the best internists in the country. And he came to Grand Rapids and he talked to the doctors and they all discouraged him. And he said, you should go to Grand Rapids. So that's how I happened to go, besides the other. And but he said, don't talk to the doctors, just talk to the head of the Rotary and to the editor of the press and to some businessman. He gave the name. And so I saw that Lee Woodruff was editor of the press. And he was kind of nonplussed by my question, is this a good place for me to start a practice of internal medicine? But they didn't say no and encouraged me.
And in the meantime, they knew who you were.
He said, I'll put your picture in the paper for you. But he said, you probably won't be there again till you die, but maybe you will. So that was quite a boost anyway.
Okay. Now, then over the next couple of years, you're building up your practice and so forth.
I was running the medical clinic at St. Mary's Hospital. I was taking patients to Butterworth Hospital. But I had a friend who was head of the X-ray department at Balyeat, and we hunted and fished together a lot. And so we were doing things at Balyeat that were quite advanced because we were bringing the university processes there, and we set up the first section meetings where different specialties would have their particular meetings.
Okay. All right. Now, of course, at the end of 1941, you've been at this for a couple of years, been very busy with all of that, and then Pearl Harbor happens. Did you think, well, first of all, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor and America getting into the war?
People were going into the service before that. We all knew it. There's a big knowledge about it. We knew we were going to be in it.
Now, were you
We
figuring?
didn't know why, except that the Japanese were our enemy and the Germans were. We didn't know anything about the intergoing, and we didn't know about the terrible things that went on in Dachau and the other prison camps.
Well, you mentioned having met people who had emigrated from Europe or come out of Germany.
List.
Yeah, and so then did he talk about the Nazi government policies and things like that?
No, we just were kind of kids together,
Okay. Now,
But he came here too then because I recommended. He was the first neurosurgeon in Western Michigan.
okay. Now, when the war actually breaks out, did you figure that you yourself were going to wind up in the service, or what was your first? What's the first kind of war-related work that you did?
We were going into reserves. There were a number of people in reserves, yeah.
Okay. And now, did you join the reserves?
No.
Okay. Now, how long was it before you began getting into war work?
Well, Pearl Harbor was pretty sudden.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a pretty big thing.
Right.
We didn't fully understand what was going to happen. That was a bad situation. It was formidable to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any idea what that meant, you know.
Now, did you wind up working for a draft board or anything like that? Because they had to do medical inspections of all the recruits and
Yes,
things like that?
I ended up doing examinations for the draft board number 6, which was Fulton Street down where
Downtown, or?
downtown.
Okay. Now, what did your work actually consist of when you were doing that? How much inspection or how much of physical did you give the recruits?
Well, we went over them pretty carefully for hypertension and some laboratory tests.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there are a lot of doctors that care to do examinations for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I learned an awful lot, even as a resident at Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
where we'd examine the freshmen and give them a pretty good going over. But I could learn that there were differences in the appearance of the mucous membrane of
Mm-hmm.
the nose and throat. And you learn to look in the eyes and look at the arteries, the veins, the nerves, test the hearing, and do different diagnostic tests.
Now, what kinds of things were supposed to sort of move somebody out of the pool or make them 4F or whatever? Were there certain kinds of disabilities or whatever that you had to screen for or watch out for in particular?
Well, I think that varied a lot. It was kind of left up to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I know someone who was eliminated because they said he had a Gowen's tubercle. Well, that was a little healed gland that was caused by tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know. Most doctors didn't know very much about tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a whole floor at the University Hospital for taking care of tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
And in my rotation through things, I had almost a year just studying that one disease.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had the floor of the surgery that was involved in treating tuberculosis. So, and we all lived together, and I learned those things too.
Mm-hmm.
I could have done some of those operations.
Okay. Now, how long did you spend working for the draft board?
Well, from, all right, I expect that was from at least March. I started about March,
March of 1942?
42.
Yeah. Okay.
and then I believe it was August that I was called into active duty.
Okay. So were you officially drafted, or
No.
had you put your name in as a reserve by then, or
I volunteered.
you volunteered? Okay. Now,
We,
when you
we were never drafted,
Mhm.
the medicals.
okay, they're all volunteer.
And most of them went in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
The Navy is a little more careful about things. They seemed to be a little more elite, and I thought that would be a little more interesting.
Okay. So you chose the Navy then?
I chose the Navy,
Okay.
and I got in. There are others that chose Navy and couldn't make it.
Okay.
I didn't see very much wrong with them, but I'd had all this training, but I wasn't very old,
Mm-hmm.
and so I couldn't get anything more than a lieutenant junior grade.
Mm-hmm.
and
No.
I had to keep that rank for a year or two, I believe.
Okay. Now, once they called you up, where did they send you first? Where did you go for
I was
training?
sent to Navy Pier, Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and they had 10,000 men living on Navy Pier
Mm-hmm.
in triple-deck bunks. And the Northwestern Medical Unit was took care of those 10,000 men.
Mm-hmm.
But their internist was the dean of the medical school, and he was considered free of continuing as an active internist, except to, so I, even though I had a little rank, I was the internist for the whole area. Dependents, I had 2 hospitals, as well as just taking care of a lot of them. I saw lots of wonderful things, medically.
Mm-hmm.
I had a great medical experience.
Okay. Now, how long did they have you there?
I was at Navy Pier 9 months,
Okay.
and I thought, well, this life is so interesting and so regulated and free of a lot of things that you have to deal with in private practice that I think I'll just transfer to regular Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied for regular Navy, and I think that's what attracted someone, that they would pick me out of that
Mm-hmm.
Navy Pier and get me ready for something else. And so anyway, I was sent to the Navy Medical School at Bethesda
Mm-hmm.
and spent 3 months there.
And what
I
kind
was,
of?
of course, the oldest person there
Mm-hmm.
of the group. There were about 30 of them. They just graduated from
From medical school?
medical school. They were taking their internship. And we had close order drill with a
Mm-hmm.
Marine sergeant. We went to different bases and visited. We got to know what submarine medicine was, aviation medicine. And we didn't know what our orders would be from there either. It was suddenly that I was sent to Bethesda.
Okay.
And we went there for 3 months and had a great time there near Washington,
Did you get into Washington? And
Oh yes, we were free to drive and go anywhere,
Mhm.
no restrictions.
all right. Now, where did they send you after Bethesda?
Well, from Bethesda we went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard
And where is that?
in Brooklyn.
Oh, Brooklyn. Okay.
And I really couldn't figure out exactly what I was there for.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do anything except check in every day, and no one seemed to know anything that I was with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a nice apartment up in Manhattan, and went and got dishes and things to live there for we didn't know how long.
And
we
who
were
was
only there
yeah.
10 days or
Okay.
something. Suddenly I came home and said, we're ordered to leave tomorrow.
Now, who were you living with at that
My
point?
wife.
Okay. And when did you get married?
We were married in 1941.
Okay. And then did she follow you to Bethesda? And okay.
We went together.
All right. So you get there, and yeah, you're in Brooklyn. And then where do they ship you out to?
When,
From Brooklyn, where did you go next?
well, then we went back to Chicago to Great Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
I ran a dispensary up at Great Lakes for a month. And then we were sent to San Francisco to get some kind of duty out of there,
Mm-hmm.
probably in the Pacific. So I went to San Francisco and stayed in a hotel and met others who were getting together to form this hospital unit. Then we knew that we were some kind of a group. We knew they had 45 doctors and 500 enlisted men, and we'd meet them every day out at a place called, I think it was Pleasanton. It was the other side of beyond Oakland. And we had, about the only thing I remember doing there was using our fire pistols, range, shooting at a range. We had one of them was the state champion of small arms fire, and the second in command couldn't even hit the big board, but this one would stand out the side and shoot and hit the bullseye, and we had a lot of fun.
And then about how long were you doing that?
Well, we were in San Francisco then from, let's see, well, from September,
Was this 1943 by this time?
September 43, yeah. And September, October, and November 11th, 1943, we were given orders to be aboard this ship. And we didn't know the name of the ship or where it was going or anything very much. And so I'd gotten acquainted with, the other 45 doctors, most of them from the East Coast.
Now, what kind of ship was it that they put you on?
It was just a big freighter, German freighter made over into a troop ship. It had, I don't know what the big number meant on there.
But there were a lot of men going over besides just your unit?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then where did they sail you to?
Well, we never saw a ship or a plane or anything. We zigzagged slowly and ended up in the New Hebrides, where there were Army units,
Right.
other, and we had a few days there. I don't know why. We all went ashore and saw the ball games that we're having, and I don't remember any USO things there, but I entertained some of the USO people when I was at MOB 10.
Okay.
Bob Hope came there after we got casualties from Peleliu, the Battle of Peleliu. That gave us a lot of people. Our hospital was 1,000 miles away, but the USS Hope and other ships would unload there, and then they go on maybe to Guadalcanal and unload, depending what the conditions were of the passengers and people.
Well, it's going to go back to your story, then kind of follow your progress a little bit. You go to the New Hebrides, which is kind of a major staging area for American forces in the region, and then from there, where was your unit actually sent to set up its hospital?
We were sent on, and we stopped at Guadalcanal for maybe 24 hours, go ashore, and Tulagi. And at Tulagi they had a big sign there that said, "Kill Japs, kill Japs, kill more Japs." Admiral House.
Right.
And so I saw Dr. J.D. Miller. He'd been in World War I. He was about 12, 14 years older than I was, but he was one of the surgeons at Atlanta. And he was stationed there at Tulagi, and so that wasn't very far away, about 60 miles. We could get a plane over to Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, or he could come up.
And then Tulagi was just off of Guadalcanal. That was quite close.
Yep.
Yeah.
Savo Island and Tulagi. Then going on northwest there. We were south of the equator and the other side of the international deadline, And we had
And then you set up,
Initiations, crossing those lines, and the usual thing.
right. And then they set up your hospital where exactly?
We set it in the Russell Island group on the little island of Bonica.
Can you describe that island a little bit? What sort of place was it?
Well, it was about 2 miles wide and 7 miles long,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a Lever Brothers English
Coconut plantation?
coconut.
Mm-hmm.
And there seemed to be only one person there in charge of that plantation, and he'd been there for 10 years, I guess. He was a British Army. I think he was just a captain.
Now, had the Japanese occupied the Russell Islands at any point?
They'd been in there, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so what?
Wasn't anything great.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Army unit went ashore there and cleaned it up without any trouble. It wasn't nothing with battles or anything.
Yeah, it was not a site of a major battle, particularly. Okay.
And then we had to build our hospital like Tinker Toys. They weren't Komatsu huts. They were made standard buildings, pitch roof, like putting together Tinker Toys.
Okay. Well, what were the buildings made of? Did they have
They
metal?
were steel.
Okay.
Tennessee Steel and Iron Company, and they made these panels
Mm-hmm.
like a prefabricated home.
And who did the building?
Pardon?
Who did the actual building?
Well, we are enlisted men and the natives.
Okay. But you didn't have CBs or.
No, we didn't seem to need CVs except for building the roads
Mm-hmm.
and putting in the utilities.
About how many natives lived on the island, do you think?
I would think that there might be 30 natives. I don't know.
Not a really large place and not a really
No,
large population.
I think we are the ones that had the natives,
Mm-hmm.
and we only had about a dozen.
Mm-hmm.
Those and the enlisted men and ourselves
Mm-hmm.
spent 3 months putting that hospital together, and there was a lot of griping about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the New Hebrides, we saw this army group of terrible-looking men, professional doctors, mainly Chicago doctors.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have any recreation, and we got aboard ship and got together, and it wasn't a mutiny, but we said we were going to have something to keep us on our feet.
Mm-hmm.
They were sitting on boxes. They didn't have enough ambition to make a bed or a chair.
Mm-hmm.
And we went back up there, and even though it was hot, we all got, jungle rot and all kinds of things from that heat. Because night and day it was 95 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Now it wasn't enough altitude there, and so it was hot. Later, when I left there, went over to Henderson Field to get a ride back home.
Mm-hmm.
We almost froze to death because the mountains there,
Mm-hmm.
not very high, but they're enough that cold air came down.
Mm-hmm.
Got down to 78 degrees, 3 nights. So I always thought that was quite a shock. Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, once that you got the hospital actually set up, how long was it before they began bringing in patients for you?
Well, there were patients right away,
Mm-hmm.
There are quite a number of outfits on the island. Maybe they were even Army,
Mm-hmm.
but we had patients. But my skipper was a Michigan grad,
Mm-hmm.
and I never got to know him very well. I was young. I was one of the youngest doctors. But he had 2 X-ray locations,
Mm-hmm.
so that we wouldn't get bombed out with one.
Right.
And he assigned me to run one of those
Mm-hmm.
X-rays. So I wasn't actually doing internal medicine
Right.
very much. And besides, we had one of the nation's first inventor of the first stress test,
Mm-hmm.
New York City cardiologist. Master, Arthur Master, and he was a captain reserve, which is kind of a high rank. And he and I and another person living in San Francisco, he had a car, and we drove out to Pleasanton with him every day.
So you were still in a way kind of continuing your education because you were working with all these people and doing all this new sort of thing. Now
we had lots of malaria, and so later on, I got to run what was known as the A ward, and I was interested in the sputum that the people had and their laboratory tests, and I got to doing blood studies by sterile puncture. I found that you could diagnose malaria like that by looking at the bone marrow. The parasites were so thick in the bone marrow, where in the blood smear, it took a while to...
Right. Now, what could you actually do to treat somebody with malaria at that point?
Where quinine was the big treatment for malaria.
Were they using atabrine too, or was that?
We had atabrine.
Was one any better than the other?
I don't know. That was depending on the kind. There was 3 kinds of malaria.
Okay.
So,
All right. And so maybe atabrine works better for certain kinds and not others, and.
well, atabrine was used a lot as a preventive. And so we'd have long lines of men coming up, and we'd pop the tablet, but they'd take a couple steps beyond the line and spit it out. So the ground was covered with yellow tablets.
Now, some of the veterans I've talked to have said that if you took enough atabrine, it started to turn yellow.
Yes, that's right.
That actually happened. Okay. But then once they actually had it, then did quinine sort of work better to help with the symptoms, as far as you could tell, or did that again just depend on which kind it was?
I just don't know, because we didn't see that personally.
Now, did you get malaria yourself?
No, I didn't get no malaria. We used DDT, a lot of it, and of course we were pretty careful about our bed nets.
But were you taking atabrine yourself? Or
No, I didn't take atabrine.
Okay.
They used so much DDT that, I felt like,
It probably killed darn near everything. Okay.
Well, I was very interested in the outdoors, and I did a lot of fishing, and we had military food, spam and things like that. And the CBs would do some wonderful baked goods for us. And we had a lot of good food. It was #1 place to have the good food.
Right, well that was what the Navy was known for.
Well, we were pretty lucky there. But we did like fresh fish, and we caught a lot of big fish. We had a boat made up at Charlevoix, Michigan. It was quite a launch. We had a little PT boat harbor, and I'm sure Jack Kennedy was in that harbor, and there before he was in trouble, just not too far away.
Right.
And then when I was in charge of this ward, we did have these visitors, and I was assigned to be the host for Bob Hope.
Okay.
Probably one of his first USO trips. And he had Jerry Colonna and Francis Langford. And we met outside, just outdoors, on kind of a board step was there. And I asked Francis Langford to come in and sing. I said, the boys probably won't make it home, but it'll be nice to hear your voice. And there are quite a few that can't see, so I was very emotional about that. That was great. And my mother's name was Landis, And I met Carol then,
Mm-hmm.
as a movie star,
Right.
too, another time. And one of the interesting things for me was that they lifted before I left San Francisco, I met a friend there, and he said he was just back from the Pacific, and he said, by all means, take a camera. He says it's a court-martial offense, but you can hide it.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful, and you'll probably get by with it. So I took a camera. It was probably an Argus, probably a 35 millimeter,
Mm-hmm.
made in Ann Arbor, you know. And over there, I took some, of course, film, you know. And while I was over there, my color came out,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife sent some color cartridges. Well, I met a combat photographer. He was carrying a big 35 millimeter.
Mm-hmm.
Had a roll of film like that. So I just said, you give me a roll of that film and I'll give you a quart of good whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. There was no place to spend any money.
Right.
We were on this little
Mm-hmm.
jungle island, so our what do you call it? They were making so much money that they were going beyond the limits, so they gave us each a quart of liquor a week. And I had a whole chest full of them,
Mm-hmm.
and I sent home to get things to make a Manhattan and something good. And also Betty sent me some rolls of Kodachrome, which I had. But after a year, I had to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And the leave said that I would, we had a fitness report every 6 months, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I always put down that I'd like to go to New Zealand. And when I got my ordeal for Sydney, Australia,
Mm-hmm.
that they thought that men mostly wanted to go to Australia, and they were doing me a favor,
Mm-hmm.
sending me to Sydney. I wanted to go to New Zealand because I'd read about the fishing over there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, fortunately, the skipper sent a little note with me and said, you go to headquarters there in New Caledonia and get your orders changed. And when I went in there, and they said, well, you're off course to go to Sydney. I said, well, I had to come here to get some recreational equipment. I had that note,
Mm-hmm.
otherwise I'd had a court-martial.
Mm-hmm.
And went on to New Zealand, and there were one of my friends with me, the both of us, and we borrowed a Jeep from the Marine unit that was there, and they gave us cans of gasoline.
Mm-hmm.
And we took off. Bob, my friend, he had a girlfriend, and or he had a girl already
Mm-hmm.
that said she'd like to ride up to where we're going, and so we took her up there, and then the police came and said, you better take her back home. We didn't want to do that, so I don't know what happened anyway. he was getting a girl involved some way. But we went to Rotorua, and that's where they had the big hotel there. We stayed in the hotel, and that's where Eleanor Roosevelt met the guide, and they touched noses
Mm-hmm.
as a sign of friendliness. The natives of New Zealand. And the country is only settled by the English in 1880, so
Yeah.
it's not really old. from there we went to Lake Taupo to fish, and we stayed at Hookah Lodge. And Hookah Lodge had a guest book there that had a lot of famous names. And one of the names was Wiley Post, and he was a pilot.
Aviator, yeah.
And anyway, that lodge cost us £1 a day. That's $2.60, I think, at the time. And today it's $2,000. Yeah. But they didn't have many people, of course, during the war, so we seemed to be the only ones there.
Okay. Well, this tape here is about out, so I'm going to stop that and reload. Okay, you had told us about your trip to New Zealand. Did you pretty well cover that, or was there something else that went on that?
No, I think I ended that
Okay.
with the fact that it's still one of the world's top places to fly fish for trout.
Mm-hmm.
Tigeraero River, which has been one of my hobbies through the years.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now then you get to go back out to the Russell Islands again, right? You had to return to duty after that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was in January of 45.
45.
And I was in the Russell Islands till the atomic bomb,
Mm-hmm.
and that's probably saved my life because we would have gone on from there too.
Yeah. Although you wouldn't have been the first wave into Japan, but the plan was to move the mobile hospital into Japan during the invasion.
I expect so, yeah.
Yeah. Now, how much business did you get while you were open? I mean, were you getting a lot of combat casualties coming through? Were they mostly disease or?
Oh yes, it was a lot of combat from Balyeat especially.
Yeah. Well, that was. Were you getting mostly Marines and naval personnel because it was a naval hospital?
Oh yes.
Okay.
The Marines,
Yeah.
First Marine Division, staged at the Russell Group is two large islands,
Mm-hmm.
separated by a deep water channel,
Mm-hmm.
and I would go down if I was OD. I might. One time they down on board that ship used some incendiary bullets and hit a dynamite mine, and it blew up. And I was sent down there to examine all their ears and see what damage had been done. And then I was also sent to several CB units.
Mm-hmm.
And so our hospital finally kind of got into closing stage.
Mm-hmm.
I was kept back and served in several CB units.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was over on this other island called Pavu.
Mm-hmm.
It was a larger island.
Right.
Have you heard of it?
Yes, actually.
Oh.
So I'll be able to tell my student how to spell it.
Well, the First Marine Division staged there,
Mm-hmm.
and the Third Fleet formed right out my window, and on the Coral Sea for that invasion of Balyeat. And J.D. Miller came from Tulagi up to Mob 10 and stayed with me for several days, and then took off, and then came after we back home. He would cry when he described what he saw in that battle.
Yeah, well, it was a particularly nasty fight.
Uh,
All right. Now, did you also later on get people sent back from Iwo Jima? Because that was sort of the next place that the Marines went after Peleliu.
I don't know. We probably did.
I mean, were you still getting combat casualties into the end of the war? Or?
Yes, I can say yes, we did Iwo Jima.
Mm-hmm.
I have that in my notes.
Okay. Now, how long was it after the end of the war with Japan? How long did you stay on the Russell Islands?
Well, I was there when they were trying to get the Japanese to make up their mind whether
Mm-hmm.
they're going to surrender or not. And I believe that was a couple of weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a kind of early August there when.
I know the skipper announced at the movie one night that orders came for me and three others to go back home.
Mm-hmm.
But I was there another 3 weeks. Yeah.
Well, you had to wait for a ride of some kind.
Well, no, I wasn't waiting for a ride. There was something to really be sure about the orders.
Mm-hmm.
They were held up.
Now, how did you?
A ride you did by yourself, and you had a choice. If you had orders, you could use any manner of means.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd use ships, or for New Zealand, I used a plane for part of it, and I got into a Coronado flying boat going from Namia to Auckland.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going along, and I saw the sun here through the porthole. And then all of a sudden, the sun was over here on the porthole, and it stayed there. So I asked what was going on, and they said, "We have an oil leak, you have to go back." So we went back, and then I believe I took a ship.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you get back to the States at the end of the war? Did you fly?
Well, I got acquainted with it. We had guests come to this
Mm-hmm.
hospital to our officers club because, you know, they could have a pretty good time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those aircraft carriers, the boys would fly over there and land on our little strip.
Mm-hmm.
Come up there. If they were officers, they could come in. And so it was a popular place. And I could go down to our little airstrip. And one day I went down there. There was a plane there. Was a SCB or something. It was anyway. It was a dive bomb.
Dive bomber, so it was a two-seater.
Yeah. And he said, "We'd like to take a ride and see. We'll go to Guadalcanal and take some pictures of Iron Bottom Bay." Yeah, I said, "Sure." And I got in, we started to take off, and that canopy came over. And we were gone quite a while. Came down, and he said, "How'd you do?" I said, "I couldn't do anything. I couldn't take pictures with that canopy over me."
Mm-hmm.
"Oh," I said, "we'll do it again." So we got back in and did it again.
And then how did you get back to the States then?
So I got acquainted with this officer of a freighter,
Mm-hmm.
and he was going back through the Guadalcanal, through the Panama Canal.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted me, he just begged me to go. He was so bored.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a good time at our club. He was around there for a couple of weeks, probably unloading stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Had nice quarters, of course. And so I thought I'd probably go. Waited every day and checked personnel on,
Mm-hmm.
see if I had any orders. No. Finally had to leave without me.
Mm-hmm.
So then I talked to three others. I said, "You know, we might be here for a month more. We have been waiting for several weeks." I said, "Why don't we go to Henderson Field and wait over there and get something?" So we did, and we were over there for, I think, four nights. When I thought I was going to freeze to death, we got this B-24, which was and we made we were in that plane 24 hours. Stopped at Johnson Island and Kwajalein, and went into Pearl Harbor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then from Pearl Harbor, where did you go? What did you do next?
Well, I spent the first night at, forgotten the name of the part of the officers club, but it was noisy, planes coming in right next to Rogers Field all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And someone told me about an officers club on the other side of the island. So we went over there, the three of us, and spent a night. And it was just a wonderful place.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found out that I went into personnel and there was nothing going on. They could give me a pass for 2 nights and 3 days. So I did that twice. And there, Kennewa Naval Air Station was near there too. It was on the windward side of the island with the big surf. So we took their mattress casings, and when they were wet, they'd float.
Mm-hmm.
And we used them as surfboards. And they had 6 kinds of scotch in the officers club. And you couldn't stay there if you had duty on the island.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be in transit
Right.
and waiting a ship. So I took advantage of that.
And then did you ship out from there, or did you fly from there?
I got an aircraft carrier.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know.
Gordon.
Yeah.
I've stopped it so you can answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So at this point, you'd gotten yourself onto an aircraft carrier and were heading back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
When I got landed in San Francisco, I had, I think, 2 nights there. I was seasick,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't enjoy anything. And then met Betty in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I got orders to the Marine base at Parris Island, South Carolina, and went to the Navy hospital there at Guilford. And we lived there
Mm-hmm.
from September till January.
And then they were discharged at that point.
I went up to Charleston and got my discharge there.
Okay.
Then we went down to Florida for 6 weeks. My father and mother were in a trailer in
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood. Enjoyed that. Didn't seem to be in a hurry to get back home. And I got back in March. And of course, all the space downtown was taken
Mm-hmm.
by doctors. I'd lost my space that I built.
Right.
Very disappointed. But the top people at Balyeat wanted me to come out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got to be out there and back in practice in the building there on the corner of Plymouth and Lake Drive.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, did you stay in the reserves after you got out?
No, I didn't stay in the
Because you mentioned before the interview that you eventually had a lieutenant commander's rank in the reserves.
I got that somewhere along the last year over.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of your time there. All right. And let's see. So you still have a valid medical license at this point?
Yes, I keep my license. We didn't have children,
Mm-hmm.
and when we got back, because we were only married 2 months before, in September '41,
Mm-hmm.
and when we got back after 2 years away, well, it was almost impossible to adopt,
Mm-hmm.
and we went through all kinds of the tests, and then unable to adapt, and I was busy, and Betty seemed to be busy too. She worked for the OPA,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a lot of fun together socially, and
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of hunting and fishing and trips, travel. Had a good
You've done
big
very well.
family that were great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you have then nieces and nephews and that kind of thing? So there was an extended family?
Yes, we have, right now we have 4 nephews of Betty's that all of them are very top
Mm-hmm.
and have been successful, and they have families, children, and so we've had a very good life with them. Mm-hmm.
Well, you've had a most remarkable story to tell. And I just,
We had one of the Betty's sister, next oldest. She had 2 sisters and a twin brother
mm-hmm.
and an older brother my age. He and I were very close.
Mm-hmm.
And this sister, just a little bit older, wanted to work for me, and she did. She worked as a secretary in the office for 5 years. Well, I got a new microscope, a stereo microscope, and I use a microscope every day of my professional life.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a blood count on June, and she had leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know it, of course. She felt good, and she continued to be well taken care of. No, she worked for me 4 years, not 5. And the 4 years, to about the last 6 months, she got sick, and we were using some chemotherapy, but she was pretty miserable now. Nowadays, I could do a lot for that person. And I was on the executive committee there, and got to be chief of the medicine section. I was the first to start a medical section meeting at hospitals here. And I was chief of staff after being secretary too of the executive committee. I was chief of staff when the tornado came through Jenison and through here with 20 casualties and deaths, lots of injuries. I went to the hospital and was just struck by the confusion. And so after being at the hospital and seeing that, and then going down to the armory on Michigan, where they were on the floor and being examined to see what could be done for them. Anyway, as chief of staff, I organized a disaster committee, and I personally interviewed 70 of the 140 members of the staff to get a good disaster plan. Each of them had an assignment, and we wrote it all up. We had mock trials. We changed the nursing notes so they would evaluate people about whether they could get out of the hospital. Had to evacuate a number to get beds for the new ones. And we even used that for a fire that broke out on a Thanksgiving Day that year. And we made a booklet with all that plan in it. I believe it's probably my biggest contribution to medicine here.
And was that the first thing of that kind that had been done in this area?
Oh,
yeah. And this was in the 60s then? About when was this?
1956.
56, okay. Because there were a couple of tornadoes in different
The
decades.
The tornado was April 3, 1956. I was chief of staff 56, 57, 58.
Now you're somebody in a fairly prominent position in the community during this whole post-war period when there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of building going on, industry growing up. Did you wind up meeting a lot of the local shakers and movers and the people who ran the big corporations and the mayors and people like that?
Oh, yes. I did. I had what was called executive examination corporation from New York City. And and would examine those, executives and head people.
For what purpose?
Oh, just to see that they were maybe doing things that they should be doing. We recognized that smoking was bad, and we were supposed to be doing something all of us even now, to bring that up and see if we can persuade people. And I don't know, I'm after having such a good plan, I just don't know what's going on in that field here. And I don't know whether the hospitals have that. But I know I sit in a conference down at Butterworth several times and hear that bell ring, and they just keep right on going without paying attention. So I don't know how you know when you're supposed to try to get out of there.
All right. Are there other things that you remember particularly about your time in the service, or things that stand out that you haven't mentioned yet?
Well, one thing is that we didn't know how many chromosomes there were in 1955. We found out in 1958. I think that was quite dramatic because, and I retired because I practiced till 1985. That's 50 years. I was 74, and I was pretty happy, but we were getting into so much paperwork, and we didn't have any insurance at all when I practiced until 39, or shortly. There wasn't very much in those days.
Right.
I guess Blue Shield and Blue Cross went to 39. But the red tape and the cost of the overhead was so much. So I had professional management, as I told you, and I developed into something pretty big here. And I had a auditor once a month and a estate planner too. And they said that you've got enough money to retire. So the rent doubled, the insurance doubled in 85. It was a good time to get out of there.
I guess so.
Because I know my last year wasn't very successful. I made a little, but I was always quite careful to do some saving, and went into Massachusetts mutual funds, and just didn't pay much attention to that part of it.
But mutual funds in the late 80s and 90s are not bad things to have. Okay. All right, then. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have someone to say these things to.
Certainly.